Let's start with the verdict handed down today. What does it mean essentially?
This is a continuation of the Myanmar military junta's effort to put Aung San Suu Kyi away in detention, essentially forever. They see her as a paramount political threat to their efforts to control power in Myanmar. Every time there's been a national election where she has run, in 1990, in 2015, and in 2020, she has won in a landslide. And the Myanmar military junta has finally decided that the only way to cope with her is the original solution they had, which was to put her away in essentially perpetual detention under house arrest. They have said that she will be serving her time in some sort of government guest house or isolated residence in the administrative capital, Naypyidaw. So we will probably not see Aung San Suu Kyi as a free woman anytime in the near future.
So, Phil, let's just walk it back a bit. So she's been convicted now of possession and import of walkie-talkies and breaking COVID-19 rules, although I think the COVID-19 rules was part of the initial conviction in December, which was reduced in December. So just walk it back on the charges that she faced.
Right. Well, she was charged with several different instances of violating the COVID regulations. Essentially, what she did was she waved to campaign supporters, acknowledging their presence when they waved at her. I mean, it is a totally fabricated charge, which is not really serious in our view. I mean, it's not clear that she did anything that anybody else did in the campaign period. There were other parties who were also doing similar things, and she has been brought out for selective punishment in this case. The walkie-talkie charges are even more ridiculous. She was found to have walkie-talkies in her residence when they arrested her on February 1st. In fact, those walkie-talkies belonged to the security guards, which were provided to her in her government position by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And under the 2008 Constitution, the Ministry of Home Affairs is in fact under the control of the military, and the minister must be a serving military man. In fact, everybody knows the Ministry of Home Affairs in Myanmar is chock full of soldiers and ex-soldiers. So essentially, the military should be charging itself with importing illegal walkie-talkies rather than charging the woman who its officials were using those walkie-talkies to protect.
I mean, if the charges were legitimate, what exactly are they saying she's doing with these walkie-talkies? Are they suggesting espionage? If we're to apply any rationale to what you say is irrational, what exactly are they charging her with?
They're charging her with possession of walkie-talkies, which were not brought in according to the import-export regulations of Myanmar. And it is a technical charge saying that these are somehow unauthorized equipment that were brought into the country. In fact, she had nothing to do with the importation of those walkie-talkies. They were brought by the Ministry of Home Affairs. The fact that they were found at her house when they conducted a raid, it's just part of an ongoing setup to try to mount as many charges against her as possible. The overall effort is really focused, as I mentioned, on trying to make sure that she is never a free woman again, that she is not in a position to generate support from her political supporters across the country to challenge military rule.
She was initially charged with contravening COVID-19 regulations, as you mentioned, and incitement. Just tell us a little bit more about the incitement charge. What exactly is she set to have done?
The incitement charge, which is something that she was convicted of last month in December, is a very broad piece of legislation. This is actually part of the penal code, and it was amended by the military after the coup. The provision essentially says that people cannot do anything that interferes or obstructs an official doing their duty. So this can be almost anything. It could be saying something to that person. It could be, pointing something out through social media. It could be refusing an order. It could be almost anything. It's deliberately written in a very broad and vague way in order to allow maximum discretion for the military to charge people as they like. And, in front of what is essentially a kangaroo court in Naypyidaw, they don't really have to prove anything. These are trials where really no evidence is required because everyone realizes that the court has probably been given instructions to find her guilty even before the trial started.
And because of lack of access for the media to the trial, including a gag order on her lawyers, it's very difficult to actually know how the proceedings themselves are being conducted.
It's almost impossible at this point. I mean, what we're finding is that some media are continuing to have some connections with persons who may be connected with the prosecution, may be connected with the defense, but those people are giving anonymous reports about what's happening in the actual court. There's no real authoritative account of what has taken place because the military wants these proceedings to take place in secret.
Now, you were speaking about Aung San Suu Kyi's support. Let's look at who Aung San Suu Kyi is and how she came into politics, including the recent landslide victory. It was the second time she was, so to speak, governing with the military, some of which has led to criticism. And this is, of course, the handling of the Rohingya massacres. Talk us through that criticism and how valid is it?
Well, it's important to understand that the governance of Myanmar is happening according to the 2008 Constitution. This was a constitution that was drafted by the military for the military and actually put through in what was a very fraudulent referendum in 2008. That constitution sets out essentially divided power, where the military has 25% of the parliamentary seats and controls some of the most powerful ministries in the country, including the Ministry of Home Affairs, the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Border Security, and also, has other certain provisions in terms of total control over security matters. Suu Kyi, as the head of the administration, the civilian administration, as the leader of the parliament, certainly had control of the legislative branch. And our major criticism of her is that she did very little with that. There was a lot of things that she could have done to eliminate rights abusing laws that have piled up over the years on the statute books in Myanmar, but she didn't do that. But, prior to what happened in 2017, no one really thought that, she was involved directly with the suppression of the Rohingya. There was always some suspicion that perhaps she wasn't that sympathetic, but quite clearly the situation was one where the military was leading the charge here. And they're the ones, of course, who committed the crimes against humanity and, in our view, acts of genocide against the Rohingya. Suu Kyi, unfortunately, decided that it would be to her political advantage to essentially defend those acts, certainly at the International Court of Justice against the prosecution that was brought by the Gambia. And, in that way, she is be seen as essentially an accomplice after the fact of what was a cover-up. Our view has been all along that she may have known about what was happening after the fact, but, she was not someone who was involved necessarily in the planning or the execution of that horrendous campaign of human rights atrocities against the Rohingya people. I think history will judge her very harshly for the decision she made. She was the foreign minister, so she could have decided to cooperate with UN investigators instead of shutting them out. She did not do that, and for that, we heavily criticized her. I think that the situation is one where there has always been a degree of tension between Suu Kyi and the military. We've not seen her as a military apologist, but as someone who I think thought that she was going to be able to squeeze the military out of power bit by bit.
So this is what I wanted to ask. What was it?
Dynamic.
Did she consider strategic action when she told the International Criminal Court of Justice that the action against the Rohingya, the killings in Rakhine, was appropriate action by the military to what they saw as insurgency, that counterinsurgency, that was the right way to behave? I think her critics, seeing her as a Nobel laureate making these actions, would say she's utterly complicit.
I think she is certainly complicit in a cover-up of what happened there. It's quite clear that this was atrocity crimes committed by the military. There wasn't any significant military resistance in that area. The so-called enemy there, the ARSA, is a ragtag bunch of militants, who frankly, probably had a few revolvers and something else, but hardly much else. And the whole idea that somehow those activities should engender a stampede of forcing over 700,000 Rohingya out of the country, and the cases of executions, torture, mass rape. I mean, the atrocities just go on and on. And so there is no justification for the kind of actions that the military took against the Rohingya. And Suu Kyi is certainly someone who should not have played a role in that cover-up. She should have, in fact, said, well, as foreign minister, we have to cooperate with the UN. I'm going to allow the UN investigators in, and they can investigate where they need to investigate. And it's up to them under the 2008 Constitution to solicit the cooperation of the military, because the civilian administration doesn't have any access to security matters that are seen as in the purview of the military. And that is a fault of the 2008 Constitution. She could have very clearly said that, and the international community would have agreed with her. She did not say that, and for that, she deserves a lot of criticism.
You mentioned at the beginning of the conversation that this could possibly be the last time we even see Aung San Suu Kyi, free, so to speak, even though she isn't. I mean, she has, as you rightly said, gone back into another cycle of house arrest since 1989. What is this likely to do for her legacy? And I'm just reflecting back on the years of sacrifice that she made being under house arrest, effectively 22 years. She's been given another 4 years, and there are still more charges, I believe, that are in the offing.
Yes. Well, look, the reality is that she is still embraced by the vast majority of the Burmese people. And she is seen quite correctly as the leader of the people who won the 2020 election. The National League for Democracy, the party she leads, won the 2020 election in a landslide. And there has been no evidence brought forward by the military that would overturn that actual determination. The reality is that the military is making up claims that somehow the elections were fraudulent. I mean, it reminds me in some ways of the sort of things that Donald Trump has been trying to say in the United States. The big lie. Certainly the Myanmar military is engaged in that to try to discredit the election victory that Aung San Suu Kyi won. And in some ways, I think that she will be rehabilitated simply because she is seen now as again the victim, again the hostage, and the person who won an election and was not allowed to return to power. The people of Myanmar are going to be outraged by these new prison sentences against her. Many of them see her as the legitimate representative, the person that they voted for, and they want to see her in power.
And speaking of that, how likely is that, given the fact that the Constitution bars anyone sent to prison after being convicted of a crime from holding high office or becoming an MP? Is she likely at any point to hold political office?
Well, I think that actually the resolution of this crisis is going to need to go far beyond the 2008 Constitution. I think that ultimately the people who are protesting on the streets and the people who are fighting in these people defense forces see tearing up the 2008 Constitution as one of the first things that has to happen if they seize power. I think that we're talking about a complete and total rewrite of the governing system in Myanmar. Many of the people in Myanmar believe that the military in its current form should no longer be allowed to exist. And that as part of any sort of long-term solution for a democratic Myanmar, there has to be a complete restructuring of the military. I think that her fate really lies with the victory of the people of Myanmar if they are able to succeed in overthrowing this military junta in the country. And it's far from clear that that's going to happen. I mean, we're in the middle of a tug of war between the people of Myanmar and a military that is determined to use deadly force to try to suppress them. And, more and more resistance is seen every day. This is widespread and systematic across the country. It is certainly the largest uprising we have seen in Myanmar in its modern history since decolonialization. So who knows what's going to happen? But I think Suu Kyi's fate now really rests with a victory of the people's forces and not some sort of possible pardon or change or something that under the 2008 Constitution, because as you mentioned quite clearly, she would be disqualified under the provisions of the 2008 Constitution if it still continues.
Mm. The reality, though, is that the people of Myanmar, Burma, have known military rule, autocracy, since even the days before her father took over from the country. And even then, it struggled to remain at civilian hands. Just tracing it back to the days of General Aung San, what agents of change existed then that allowed him to be at the helm of government, and that somehow paved the way for her to come out of house arrest and once again become a political leader, de facto ruler of Myanmar?
Well, there was a decision really in 2008, 2009, as the pressure was mounting on the military for human rights accountability, particularly crimes against humanity that the military had committed in parts of eastern Burma. There was a pressure by the military to basically re-engage with the international community, move away from a traditional supporter, which is China, and try to engage with the West. And that led to that democratic opening. But I think as part of that democratic opening, the military also thought that they would be able to maintain power behind the scenes, that they could have the semblance of democracy without having their control of the country really challenged. And Suu Kyi's election victories in 2015 and 2020 made it clear that that was not the case, and that ultimately the military would be slowly pushed out of power, and possibly there would be a change in the constitution. So I think this is some of the things that motivated Senior General Min Aung Hlaing to launch the military coup on February 1st, 2021. That and his own personal ambition, wanting to be president of the country, really drove him forward. And it's backfired spectacularly against the military. There is now, as I mentioned, the most widespread resistance of the people of Myanmar that we've ever seen. Mm. And it doesn't look like it's going to change in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I think that we're going to see this tug of war between the people and the military continue until one side finally triumphs.
The power figures within the military, who are they, and are they open to change? As you mentioned, in 2011, they relinquished power, but only with a constitution that still allowed them to have a quarter of presence in parliament. Could this military junta be open to relinquishing further power, have a transitional government of sorts, given the fact that they contested the election results? They even claimed that there was widespread fraud. Are these people who are willing to negotiate with civilians for greater democracy or democratic principles?
So far, every indication points to the answer no. That so the military is totally focused on trying to reassert power. That they are prepared to use rights, abusing tactics of the most heinous sort to try to maintain power, and that there's no real interest in negotiating. Both sides are calling each other terrorists. So I think that, in fact, there's going to be at least another year or two of this ongoing sort of tit-for-tat violence and battle on the ground in Myanmar before something momentous happens. Either the military cracks or it gains control over enough of the PDFs and others through violent means that it is basically able to subdue the rebellion. And it's unclear to us which way it's going to go. All that's clear is that there's going to be more violence. The situation for human rights is probably going to get worse. And Suu Kyi and the party she leads will continue to be sidelined. In fact, many people believe that the military junta is planning to use these charges of alleged electoral fraud to possibly disband the National League for Democracy. This is something that's very popular. I mean, the Cambodian government has disbanded the main opposition party. Thailand has disbanded several main opposition parties, over bogus charges. It's something popular that in the neighborhood, and I'm sure that the Burmese military is getting some advice from some of its dictatorial neighbors that this is the way to go. So it's unclear how it's going to go, but I think that this is not necessarily going to be solved through negotiation unless there is enough pressure brought by the international community to bring the military to the bargaining table. And so far, we're just not seeing that. We're not seeing action by the UN Security Council. We're not seeing the kind of comprehensive sanctions by other parts of the world beyond the EU, the US, Canada, and the UK. So, I mean, there needs to be much more done before we can see something change on the ground.
All right, just briefly, do you think, as you say, the growing popular support on the ground would be enough to push the military out, or at least force them to bow down to pro-democracy forces?
Well, it's hard to know where the breaking point is, because this is a military that believes in a foundation myth that they are the only force that was able to maintain the Union of Myanmar for so many years against efforts to split it by various different ethnic groups and ethnic organizations. There is a strong sort of central core belief in a military that has traditionally had businesses and sort of dual systems outside of social control, outside of the control of government, that it takes care of its own people and it takes care of its own families. So in some ways, it's a force that has been apart from society and above society, and they are not going to go easily into the night when they're being told that something would have to be there'd have to be a fundamental reforms of their role in society, because the Myanmar military believes that they should be the leaders of the country, and they have continued to act on that belief throughout their history.
Phil, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.